if you're listening to this, food for thought, try not to crush your timeline down as tight as you can get it if you can. From our perspective on the lawyer side, there are a lot of differences that you need to consider when buying even a duplex, tri, or quad. You have to check zoning, building permits, work orders, fire inspections. I mean, these are all extra things that are crucial for either the investor to check or have somebody on their team check for them, like the lawyer, right? Try to do like general homework on like a whole region, like almost like farm a particular area. Like if the northwest quadrant of Burlington is where you want to like invest, well, find out what the zoning is for all the properties in that area ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I already know that anything in this area is zoned for duplex.
What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and we're back with Ryan from Carson Law. Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Doing well, and so excited to talk about today's subject matter because a few commenters have been asking, just wondering, what are some of the common closing issues? So when someone's getting close to closing on the property, actually getting to take ownership of it, what sometimes comes up, especially now that we're kind of in the COVID area, 2021, what sometimes puts a kink in a deal or causes a client of yours to end up needing to get extensions, or when maybe even put the deal off rails? What comes to mind when we're talking about that?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll kind of give you a little bit of a state of a union sort of from our side of the desk on this. So, I mean, number one, you'd think in today's, modern era with all the technology, especially that's driven by COVID, like everybody's become more tech savvy and more tech oriented because you can't meet in person and so forth. And you'd think that it would have made things faster. But to be honest with you, the process of real estate deals in conjunction with the banks especially is slower in my opinion. And I'll kind of explain that in a little bit more detail here. I think it's slower because number one, appraisers either weren't able to appraise, and so they had to do appraisals in alternate ways, which were slower, or appraisers were only doing so many deals a day as opposed to the volume they were doing pre-COVID. So there seems to be been this slowdown with appraisals, which appraisals, if people aren't aware, drive what the bank will lend on. So normally the appraisal number comes in at the purchase price number, but if people aren't aware, the appraisal is actually what the bank lends on. So they care about the purchase price, but they actually lend on what the appraisal is. And so the problem is some banks and some lenders won't even send the lawyer instructions for processing and signature with the clients until the appraisal happens. Well, if the appraisals are now like days or weeks delayed in a process that's already truncated because everybody wants speed with real estate closings, that's a big problem that we're seeing right now, which is appraisals aren't happening until much later in the process, like the week of closing or days before closing, which means we're not getting mortgage instructions until, only a few days or a week before closing or the day of closing, which then is causing obviously a scramble to, review it, process it, meet the clients, sign them, and still try to close all on the same day, which, as you can kind of imagine from what I just said there, it becomes more difficult. Now, again, I don't want people to think like the sky is falling here and this is like every deal we touch. It's certainly not. We're still probably able to close 80 to 90% of our deals without really a hitch because of our processes and our systems, and just we're constantly following up and trying to check with clients and the different parties involved, i.e. the bank in this scenario. But where I used to see only 5 for every 1,000 deals of this kind of problem, now it might be like 100. for every 1,000.
Right. Yeah.
So it's still not a large percentage, but it's much larger than it was pre-COVID. And I think in part this day-to-day delay or this slowdown or this truncated, stress pot that we're kind of falling into with signing documents and processing bank documents and lender paperwork and stuff at the very last moment is driven by the fact that the process is actually slower. And one of the reasons it's slower is because the appraisers can't either do the appraisals as quickly or as many in a given day because of COVID protocol that they're having to adhere to. Or the other problem is there's just that many more deals funneled into the pipeline, and there's only so many appraisers still, and there's only so many bank people. So you and I kind of talked about this offline. The volume of real estate and the volume of transactions has been exceptionally higher over the last number of months, and maybe even the year compared to previous years. And the players, though, are still roughly the same. Like, you still have the same amount of lawyers, the same amount of like realtors, mortgage brokers, banker, representation, and appraisers. It's not like they've grown exponentially with the volume of deals. So I think one problem that we're seeing on our side of the desk is just the speed at which deals process, surprisingly, is slower. So that's something for people to keep in mind, maybe when they're thinking about their closing timeline.
Yeah.
Where you might normally think, oh yeah, it's easy, close in 30 days, no problem. Maybe give yourself 45 to 60 days instead of trying to make it 30 days or less. That might help you with your other parties like the bank and appraisers and lawyers and so forth. That may save you a lot of stress, which is not people not being competent in their jobs, but it's just what we're dealing with. It's a COVID reality, and it's just a volume reality that you have to kind of consider. And I appreciate, not everybody knows this because not everybody's doing volume deals like we do in our business, right? Yeah. But if you're listening to this, food for thought. Try not to crush your timeline down as tight as you can get it, if you can. If you need it to be fast because that's a key part of the deal, well, then so be it. We just need to make sure we're all on the ball, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that's one thing we're definitely seeing that's kind of scuttling deals or making deals kind of be like day by day extensions, is just the slowness of appraisals happening, and just the sheer volume going through the banking system, which is really operating with probably the same amount of people, or in some cases maybe fewer because they closed branches. Maybe people were laid off, etc. Right. The other thing would be a lot of lawyers, and us included, are moving the majority of our closing funds via wire now, as opposed to like a direct bank deposit. And so wires are more secure and more guaranteed. And so it's a safer movement of money, but they are actually potentially a bit slower in the sense some of them can take, a full day to move. Some of them can take, an hour or so, whereas a direct deposit, it's just however much time it takes you to go to your bank and back. Right. So, but because banks were closed and because certain law firms were closed, etc., lawyers had to pivot like everybody else out there. And so we just adopted an electronic platform of banking that we're just continuing to use for, again, 80 to 90% of our deals. If we need to close, an old school way, then we still have that, but everything's moving by wires. So that makes things potentially a little bit slower depending on the speed at which people's banks process wires. But they all happen in the same day, which is great. They're all guaranteed same day, but that's something to keep in mind a little bit too. So those are more like practical and maybe like procedural things that we're seeing from our side of the, the table, from our side of the desk. other things that we're seeing is just an increase in real estate investors in general, which in part is probably because of your,
Sure.
educational platforms. It's in part people realizing, you know, I want to have control of my money and my investments. Why do I want to leave it to the banks or the government to, like, make me money, because they're not going to. Interest rates are low, and so people are looking for really good returns on investment. And real estate's, proving, as it has historically for many years, to be a solid return on investment. Where markets, have interest rates that are so low right now, you can't really just invest in GICs and mutual funds and really expect that much, right? So there's obviously a lot of people going into real estate investing. And I think you and I talked about this offline too. A lot of people think real estate investing is just super easy. Like, hey, Matt can do it, so why can't I do it, right? Not knowing the many years and hours that you've spent, educating yourself on it, working hard, working behind the scenes, maybe not realizing, like, oh, well, Matt, yeah, he might have started by himself, but now he has this huge team that does a lot of work for him too, right? And they're all working all these hours, right? So, real estate investing and the real estate market in general, I think everybody who's in it from a mentoring, coaching, and education perspective and professional service perspective, like us, we've done a really good job making it look really easy. And try to, everything's about, trying to streamline and make things simple and quick, and because that's just what people want. So that's what you kind of have to try to deliver. And so for the most part, that's what is happening. But because you have all these new people getting into real estate investing, and maybe a bit so hastily, like they haven't done their research, or they haven't teamed up with a really good coach, or teamed up with a really good power team of professional advisors. They just kind of jumped into it because they're excited, or whatever the case is. That old saying of, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that becomes a problem that people start to learn pretty quickly on their first couple of deals, right? You see this a lot with the people buying the smaller multiplexes, like duplexes, tris, quads, because that's not too scary to go buy as a first segue into something outside of single family. But from our perspective on the lawyer side, there are a lot of differences that you need to consider when buying even a duplex, tri, or quad. You have to check zoning, building permits, work orders, fire inspections. I mean, these are all extra things that are crucial for either the investor to check or have somebody on their team check for them, like the lawyer, right? And a lot of people don't make their deals, conditional for that kind of due diligence. So they go firm in on the deal. They don't check these things. We recommend, well, we got to check it for you regardless. It might not be conditional anymore, but we got to check it. And then lo and behold, of course, let's use an example of, we do zoning and permitted use is only a single family.
Yeah.
Well, and you wanted to use it as a triplex. So now you've got the issue of, well, if you still close on the deal and it's not permitted for that use, now you run the risk of getting flagged by, building and zoning, and you might have penalties and fees and work to do to make it a valid triplex. And until you do that, you might not be able to use it as a triplex. So now you don't have that cash flow that you expected. And then if, maybe you wouldn't have done the deal at all, right? So I think, maybe to bring a quick answer to this, one thing that would be great for real estate investors to try to start doing as the market's starting to potentially, level out a little bit more. And maybe that's just summer vibes. People are trying to take a break in the summer, who knows? But if you can make it so that you do your deals with at least a due diligence period to kind of check all those things, like just get a 30-day due diligence or something. You need some sort of due diligence period so that you can check, make sure your financing and your zoning, work orders, building permits, like all those things have been kind of done, so that with some confidence, just because they say they used it as a triplex, it is going to be used by you that way and legally, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also get asked the question, like, how long does it take to get those search results back from, because you have to order those from the cities and everything. They don't come, they're not a central depository like the land registry offices for title searches. They take probably anywhere from one week of business days to 2. So you're probably talking 5 to 10 business days to get. Some might be a little bit longer even still because of COVID. So that's why I sort of said, 15 business days for due diligence might not be a bad thing to try to start reintroducing into your deals. But I also know that that's hard to do, right? Like if the market's aggressive, sometimes it's hard to go with conditional offers because you won't win anything.
Yeah.
So you really have to kind of do your pros and cons, balancing. I mean, and that something that might also help that if you're in that scenario of running into issues of not being able to make the offer with a condition, or you're going in competitive still and you got to go firm. Maybe try to do like general homework on like a whole region, like almost like farm a particular area. Like if you know the northwest quadrant of Burlington is where you want to like invest, well, find out what the zoning is for all the properties in that area ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I already know that anything in this area is zoned for duplex. So I shouldn't really be concerned that I got to check them one off, so to speak, right? So those would be things that we've seen, like kind of scuttle deals or good problems. Other things are people are buying more and more like recreational vacation type properties, like cottages and like resort cabins and these sorts of short-term rental opportunities have been very popular in the investment world. And so things there to be like cautious or concerned about is like, what's the supply of water and sewer, right? Is it on city or is it like localized, meaning well and septic? Because if you have financing, you're going to want to know that the well is potable with no bacteria, and that the septic is certified and working, right? Because otherwise, there are lots of lenders that won't advance funds without those certificates, right?
Yeah.
So that's something obviously to definitely take into consideration as well, that we've seen delay deals or scuttle deals altogether because people didn't know that they had to do that, or it took too long for it to come through, in which case, the financing pulled out or something like that, right? And I mean, another thing that we've seen common, because there are so many people buying cottages and recreational properties, is making sure ahead of time that you've got a pretty up-to-date survey, and from the title search that you have actual access right up to the water, like your land goes to the water for waterfront. Because there's lots of people that buy cottages or recreational properties and they're not aware of like the shore allowances, which are technically owned by the municipality, and now you don't actually own the land right up to the water. You only abut the shore allowance, and shore allowances are typically owned by the government. Now you've got to pay them to build a dock or put a waterfront cabana or boathouse in or something like that, right? So,
and that can end up adding a significant cost if you haven't factored that in ahead of time.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So those would be things that we've seen like more recently that have made deals, kind of scuttle or get delayed or create unexpected, work or expenses possibly for clients. Again, I think it's a byproduct of several things. It's like the exponential volume that we've seen over the last several months to year, with like relatively the same people processing or less. Appraisers are just not able to keep up with it, or the banks are just slower with it. So funding is slower. And even lawyer to lawyer transfers are slower because we're using wires, right? So, planning your closing date and even planning your day of move, right? Like don't think you're going to move into a house at 9 a.m. That's not going to
Yes.
happen. You should actually plan to move in like the next day. You know, I've been on other conversations and presentations and actually really almost begging realtors and clients to like take a 1-day bridge.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, and the only pushback I ever get on that is, well, you know, now you have to pay like interest on a bridge loan. Well, yeah, it's at 2%. You know, it's prime plus 4%. Like, what is that? 5%, you know?
Yeah.
So it's very, very, in the grand scheme of things, saving your stress level. Like, it's just the cost of the deal. We're not talking thousands of dollars here. We're talking maybe hundreds, you know, tops. It's going to save you, I think, a lot of stress, a lot of planning. You know, you just know, hey, like the deal's going to close on August 6th, but we've got a bridge until the 10th. So we have not only, you know, the buffer of the weekend to move, but we have Monday as well, in case there's a delay and financing happens on Monday or even Tuesday for that matter, right? If it's the 10th, right? So I think the bridge is an underutilized tool.
Yeah, that's a great tip that I rarely hear people bring up.
Yeah, like just help you manage your timelines of like a simple thing like moving in, you know, or moving out or whatever the case is, or managing renovations, right? Like, I mean, don't be afraid to, if you're selling and buying, don't be afraid to have some sort of bridge there, right? Or if you're just buying, and it's an investment, don't like start your lease with your tenants the day of the close.
Yes,
like,
that's going to create a lot of stress for everyone involved.
Yeah, start it a couple of days to maybe weeks later. I know that means you're not making money right away, but the opposite effect that could happen is far more stressful. Like a deal has some trouble closing, and now you've got people that are like homeless and they got to pay to like store their stuff and go in hotels, and it can make a real you know, hornet's nest out of something that if you just kind of planned it a bit differently. So it's like, I'm going to buy on this day, August 6th, but I'm not going to actually put the tenants in until September 1st or August 15th or something like that. Just give a bit of a buffer. It's not going to hurt that much in the grand scheme of things. It's not going to make your deal become unprofitable. I don't think.
100% agree. That's great advice. And I know one other subject I kind of want to explore with you here, Ryan, is let's say that either it's day of closing or we're quickly approaching the day of closing, and we're going to, for whatever reason, not be able to close on that day. And I know every situation is very unique to that exact context, but what are some, you know, solutions or concessions or options you often see investors use when it comes to having to ask for an extension on a closing date? Does it normally just start off with, hey, is everyone cool to extend? And then we kind of go from there, or what's your general thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it start like from two different like angles. Some people are a lot more hands-on, which meaning like they're going investor to investor, like more direct at their levels, or like they're going through like their realtor level or something like that. So it's a little bit more informal than the other option, which is it's all through the lawyers. There's two reasons people might want to keep it more at the, you know, direct level of like investor to investor or like their realtors is it's a little bit more casual, or could be a little bit more casual.
That personal nature I think is really important, because like the moment it's lawyers talking, it kind of feels very impersonal. I think it's easy for people to be shorter in emails and stuff. Like if their lawyers like, are you cool with this? I think it's a lot easier to send an email that says no than to be looking someone in the eyes and just be a jerk for the sake of it.
Yes. Yeah. And really the reason it's harder for the lawyers to be more like informal about it and stuff is just we're processing deals on a volume basis. Or most real estate lawyers are, right? Like we're trying to do, you know, as many deals as we can on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, right? Whereas for this investor and or this realtor, even though they might be busy, they probably only have that deal that day, you know, like, or maybe one or two deals that day. They probably don't have, for example, like today I have 19 deals. Well, like you don't have a realtor doesn't have 19 deals happening that day, right? So the problem the lawyer has is, you know, you're trying to prioritize whatever you have that day for like signing appointments, you know, phone calls, registrations, with dealing with problems. And so naturally, there's only just so much time to carve up in the actual, you know, registration period of 9 to 5. And so that's why I think lawyers' letters to each other and emails and calls with each other are probably a lot more straight and to the point. Potentially tone is not getting like interpreted correctly. Whereas if you do it direct realtor to realtor or investor to investor, I think there's more time that you can just talk to each other about it to reassure, like, look, I got the financing. Like, don't panic here. Like, this is not a mash the panic button type of thing. Like, here it is. It's just, it's coming from a private lender. It takes them twice as long to advance the money. And unfortunately, it's not going to get there until Monday. You know, if you give us the, you know, the 2 extra days we need, I can give you an extra $500. Like, let's call that fair, you know, or, you know, I'm making a simple example, right? But I think that sort of conversation, I mean, I think that still needs to be papered. So whether the realtor papers it in an amendment or that is relayed to the lawyers to then just say, hey, our clients have talked, confirm this with your client, but our guy needs an extra 3 days. These are the terms they've agreed to. Just sign back that your client confirmed with you that this is correct. And that's a really good way, I think, of utilizing your, that's really good way for the investors to communicate with each other and then utilize their real estate agents and the real estate lawyer. Is kind of, they come to the terms, then they communicate those terms to the realtor or their lawyer, and then we just put it in writing so that everybody signs off on it, and boom, we're good. But they can kind of really take the time to massage and personalize the request, as opposed to maybe it coming from the lawyer right away, which, depending on how it's delivered and perceived, maybe people's backs get up against the wall, and it's not really, it's not something that needs to be like that, but just because of the way people's day might be going or what have you, and how it's kind of come out of left field, that kind of thing can be maybe avoided.
Yeah, 100% agree. That's great advice. And I think, again, just to recap for everyone watching at home, it really is important once you know it's not going to close on time. I think the sooner you know, the sooner you should start that communication and especially, I agree that informal communication at first, if you can be investor to investor, great. If it's realtor to realtor, that's also great. But being able to provide some context, right? As well as you mentioned, Ryan, that reassurance. Hey, I actually have my financing, insurance just needs one more day to get the binder together, or whatever it happens to be that's causing the delay. It's really important to be able to just provide that context to the seller, because otherwise they're just kind of in this, you know, mystery box of like, maybe he's got no money, maybe this is a scam, maybe, you know, whatever, they've decided they don't want my property anymore. And without that personal touch and the context, I think it can be really a fast slope or slide into people getting, you know, really defensive and really like, no, screw you. And once we start kind of finding that negativity in the deal, it's very easy for things to start going sideways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a quick slide, unfortunately, down the wrong path. And I think that's where, you know, direct communication is still valuable. I mean, if it's you know, I think you'll know, you know, when it's better for you to do it directly versus like, oh no, this is just something for the lawyers to do right off the hop. I think it'll be fairly obvious Or if you have to ask yourself that question, like, oh, I wonder if this should just be the lawyer doing this, then probably we should. But if it's just talking to them and saying, look, we've done everything we need to do. It's just really busy out there. The money's not going to show up until Monday, and we're supposed to close Friday. Let's just all agree that I'll pay you an extra couple $100, or, what's your cost, or what impact does this have on you? And let's negotiate that right here, right now. And then we'll just get our lawyers to confirm it in an extension.
100%. Yeah. Really appreciate all the advice and just creating the situational awareness for investors as well, because oftentimes they get really caught up in their own narrative of just, I'm trying to close this deal. Surely everyone knows that I'm trying really hard to close this deal, but without reaching out, communicating, again, the other party just doesn't know.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate you taking the time to chat with us this month again, Ryan, as always. If you guys want to reach out to Ryan or talk to anyone at Carson Law, we've got links in the video description down below to all their contact information. Really encourage you guys to reach out to Carson. And in fact, I was just poking around on your website earlier today and checking out some of the blog posts again. So I know I talked about it, I think like 6 months or a year ago, but just a reminder, guys, there's lots of great information there as well that you should go and check out. And again, just appreciate it, Ryan.
Thanks a lot, Matt. We love it too. Thanks a lot, guys. Good luck out there, all you investors.